Hey everybody, this is Future Willows here. If you're a follower of the Passive Income podcast, you probably don't even know who I am yet, but I'm actually the guest on this episode, and I'm actually currently doing the editing for this episode. Fun fact: we had some technical difficulties, so we actually had to switch where we were filming halfway through the episode. So there's some audio issues, but I've cut out all the issues. However, there might be some jarring, weird cuts because we cut back and forth between the two programs. So if there's any weird cuts, that's why. But I think I fixed all the actual errors. So thanks for listening to the Passive Income Podcast, and I hope you enjoy this episode with me, Willows.
Welcome to the Passive Income Podcast. I am your host, Dividend Dave, and joining me today is Willows at Vote Willows on Twitter. And Willows has a very interesting, great backstory, so I'm going to throw it over to you to give yourself a brief introduction, and away we go.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Dave. I appreciate it. Glad to be on the Passive Income Podcast. This is exciting. Yeah, I get drunk for a living. Do you need any more information, or is that? Um, yes. So I own a winery here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We're actually the only winery in the province. When you think of Canada's wine industry, you think of the Okanagan on one side, you think of the Niagara region on the other, but Manitoba isn't exactly known for its growing season. If you're listening from outside of Canada, then Manitoba kind of has a reputation for being a little bit cold, I think. We have yeah, I've seen negative 50 degrees Celsius before in my life. I've lived here. This is my 26th year living in here in Winnipeg, and it's gotten cold. It's gotten cold enough that like the government's like, yeah, just don't go outside. Just so not great conditions for growing grapes, but we actually have a little vineyard just south of Winkler in the Pembina Valley, about 10 minutes off the U.S. border in Manitoba. And I grow mainly cold hardy hybrid grapes. I have about 15 different varietals. They've mostly been engineered by various universities, the University of Minnesota and the University of Quebec City mainly, to be like basically a very good tasting non-cold hardy grape and a not good tasting cold hardy grape, and they made these like hybrid grapes. So even a couple of the grapes that we have planted are just like a string of numbers. They're like 3.126 because they don't even have a name yet. They're just like, we buy them from agriculture research departments and grow them. So they're not even like commercially available. But yeah, and then we also make wines out of local fruits. So we have like a blueberry wine, a raspberry wine, a cranberry wine, strawberry rhubarb, stuff like that. And then we do like apple ciders. We have sangrias, different coolers, vodka sodas, hard iced tea, stuff like that. So we're called Shrugging Doctor Beverage Company. It's a doctor that shrugs. I thought it was funny. But yeah, I started that when I was 18 years old. I got booted out of my parents' house right when I turned 18, and I moved into a house that I rented with like 5 other 18-year-olds. So I'm sure you can imagine we had a lot of people kind of in and out, and I didn't have any. Yeah, well, we were drinking probably 5-6 times a week. Like it was basically like. Yeah. Basically, my entire the floor and the couches were just covered in people sleeping, and then you'd wake up in the morning and kick people awake on the floor and turn on the Xbox and start drinking again, basically. And you know, my business partner and I, we started making wine in the basement, and just out of like, I remember we had his father had like an apple tree, and we just like snuck back there and stolen a bunch of apples, and then made like an apple wine and stuff like that. And so we weren't that bougie. We actually couldn't afford wine kits. So we basically just like stole.
I'm loving this backstory. This is incredible.
We like, yeah, so my business partner grew up with a lot of brothers and sisters, so his mother would like buy a lot of like fruit juice for the kids, right? They go through like 4 liters a day, so we just like siphon off a liter at a time until we had enough fruit juice to like make a little batch of wine or something. So we really we
Blame it on like little Johnny.
wasn't me. Yeah, wasn't me. So Yeah, it was. We started in the entire business for a $50 investment that we split between the two of us, and that was mainly to buy like a jug to ferment the stuff in, and some starter yeast to go for. So it was
$25 each.
yeah, that's correct. So it was a $50 investment. We just passed $1 million in sales last year. Yeah, so we started making wine in the basement and just sharing it with the friends that came over to drink, and it got to a point where it was like they weren't bringing beer over anymore. They were just like, "Oh, just drink your stuff. It's way better." And I was like, that's interesting," because I had kind of always been an entrepreneur
Right.
when I was a kid. Like I always like I've never really had a job or anything. Like when I was a kid, I just kind of used to make money doing different things. My brother used to play sports, so I used to film him playing like hockey and then edit it in a little like TSN style like highlight reels with music and then burn it onto DVDs and sell it to parents for $20. I used to do that when I was like 13. And then all the classic like
Entrepreneurial right from the get-go.
yeah, all the classic get free stuff off Facebook Marketplace and resell it, and all the classic kind of teenager entrepreneur behaviors. But then when I got kicked out of my parents' house when I was 18, I learned I'm like, oh, things like cost money. I gotta like,
Yeah.
you want rent every month?
Good thing really is a kick in the
Yeah, I'm like, I just paid rent last month. Why do I have to pay it again?
yeah.
And so
I bought
even
groceries last week. I just
yeah,
paid that phone bill last month. Yeah, I know all those bills just keep coming no matter what you do. One month you pay them,
yeah,
and another one the next month.
yeah. So it was kind of like a perfect storm where there were three things that happened at the same time. It was like we I figured out I needed to make money. I figured out that this was 2014. So Manitoba is one of the most regulated liquor industries in the entire world, actually, in Canada specifically, but like actually in the entire world, we're extremely, extremely regulated. So it's kind of this weird conflict of interest situation where like they're making the laws that regulate themselves as the only seller and wholesaler. So every single bottle I produce in Manitoba, I have to sell to the government, and then they sell to the public. So I talk to a lot of Americans and I tell them that, and they're like they literally cannot get their heads around that concept.
Going?
Okay, so they go a step farther than like regulating and controlling everything. I actually have to then pay them a markup on every bottle I sell as well. So it ends up being between kind of 20, 30, 40, 50% of my gross on the bottles. I just have to pay in markup, which is essentially tax. But in 2014, it actually used to be worse. But in 2014, they loosened it a little bit. So like they had like 15 licenses that became three, and it became like more streamlined to get a license and everything. So when we started, I'm like, oh, I got to make money. I started doing research. I'm like, okay, well, what are we good at? And then I had these people being like, oh, well, your wine's really good, and we're like, okay, yeah. So it was kind of this like triple threat where it was like, I need to make money. I know now I'm getting like validation that I'm good at making wine, and it just became easier to start a winery. So this was kind of like, okay, let's jump into this. So we jumped in with no knowledge and no expertise and no assets. And when you approach a bank and you're 18 years old and you have no assets, and they're like, wait, you want to start a business getting drunk? And you go, so it's a little bit hard to get funding. So we had some help from a little organization called Futurepreneur. They're like a crown corporation that specializes in like under 29-year-old entrepreneurs. So they were able to broker a deal between us and the Business Development Bank of Canada to get us a little bit of funding to like actually get a building and proper equipment and start. But all said and done, we loaned less than $50,000 of money to get the whole thing started with, and only $50 of our own money. But for reference, like you'd spend there's wineries that spend $1 million, $2 million. There's a brewery in my city that spent $17 million starting. So getting everything done for like 50,000. I remember I was telling this story to somebody who owns a brewery here in Winnipeg in their bar. So I told that story, and he's like, $500,000. That's pretty good because it's like loud in the bar. And I'm like, no, 50. He's like, what? Like, you spend how much? So it's yeah. So that was
Yeah.
we
Wow.
2014, 15, 16. We went through the process of like trying to get money and then getting the building and renovating it all ourselves and doing all that stuff. And then I was actually homeless for about 9 months, maybe 7 months for in 2015 or 16. Which being homeless in Winnipeg winters isn't great either, but and
Oh,
then we
Winnipeg, as the rest of the world calls it.
yeah, and then we launched January 2017, so very early 2017, and yeah, and now we're here. I haven't slept since then, but I've also been drunk since then, so can't complain. Back then when banks kept saying no to me, I was like, oh, these people are so out of touch, they don't know anything. But now it's like I look back at these business plans I had, and I'm like, oh, there's no wonder they just they denied me. I didn't know anything.
That a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I just called it kind of the A&W challenge where yeah, so and I have to do a disclaimer here. So the A&W in America is nothing like the A&W in Canada. They got bought out in like the 90s and they're two completely separate entities. So the one in America is not good, but the one in Canada I think is like in my opinion premier fast food. I don't think you can get better quality fast food in this country than A&W in my opinion. Yeah, it's worth the extra money. It's they use like all locally sourced like quality beef, like free range beef and chicken and stuff. And with me, with like
Right.
especially with like a stock investor, like I find it really hard for me to buy companies that I can't personally get behind. So I know people always talk about how like McDonald's I think is like a dividend aristocrat and is raise their dividend every year by for 25 years or whatever, and a really solid kind of investment. But I don't own any McDonald's in my portfolio because I personally don't eat their food. So with A&W, I was like, you know what? When I order, I have a bad habit of like ordering on Skip the Dishes and just paying 27 extra dollars for a meal than I should with delivery fees and tip and all that. But so I kind of like, okay, I'll drive to A&W every time I want A&W, and then I'll just purchase a share of their company every time I order a meal. So would it add the extra, whatever it is, $30 today, $33 today, which is basically the delivery fee and tip I'm paying anyway. And then build a little portfolio with it. I just kind of think that's like one of the best ways for people to get into investing if they don't really know anything is just like buy shares in the companies that you actually use and like, right? So I was kind of mentioning that like I don't own any McDonald's shares because even though it's a like sound a good company, good dividend growth, but I just don't own any because I can't get behind the product. Same way there's a lot of like oil companies like the TSX is mainly based on banking and oil basically, but I'm not heavily invested in oil companies because I don't see it as a 50-year play. Like Warren Buffett always says, don't try to find the next big thing, just find out what's going to be here in 100 years and invest in that. And oil's not going to be here in 100 years, I don't think. So I can't get behind non-renewable energy in a big way, even though they're really good investments right now. So that's kind of my same idea with this. It's like, I like eating the product, and I think it's a good way to kind of start and just get in and start an investment.
Basically, another sector I like to get into is REITs. It's one of my favorite sectors. I own several. RioCan's one of my favorites. Northwest Healthcare I like as a REIT because it also crosses over into the healthcare sector. Anything in the REIT sector that you like invest in, or what are your thoughts on REITs overall?
Big REIT fan. Big REIT fan. I'm just bringing up my portfolio here. I have a ton as well.
Nice.
Northwest Healthcare, definitely that you mentioned is I'm a big fan. I got into that position just the beginning of COVID because I was thinking, if anyone's gonna be making money, it's and we have a
Healthcare sector.
yeah, and we have an aging population as well in Canada, so I think that's a safe bet. Any real estate backed investment is pretty strong. I have a
Yep.
relatively big position in Artis real estate, which is based here in Winnipeg. So they're kind of
Yep.
my hometown hero. Just have a affinity
Nice.
from them because I know people that work for them, and so
Cool.
there might be better holdings, but I just kind of have an affinity for artists.
Yeah,
And
you're a little close to home type of thing. They've been on my watch list for a while. I've never pulled the trigger, but yeah, I'm definitely familiar with that name.
And then there's a few others. I know there's, if I can find the ticker, there's one I was investing in that's, it might be a dark route to go down where you're like, we have an aging population, so I should invest in healthcare REITs. But there's also one that invests in like old age facilities. So I bought some position in that because I was kind of thinking, aging population. We have a lot of people in assisted living in the next 20, 30 years. That might be a good investment.
Is it Chartwell?
It might be. I'm scrolling down my portfolio here. But yeah, I don't want to take too much time just scrolling. But yeah, and then,
Yeah, no,
I
no worries.
mean, realty income's the one you always hear people talk about, right? That they've increased their dividend for 60 years or something. And
Yeah, that's the American REIT.
yeah, yeah, and a lot of people like that because they pay monthly dividends, which that's why they're monthly income REIT because they
Yeah.
pay monthly dividends. So a lot of people like to,
And that's what I love about REITs. The majority of, well, all the REITs I own, and I'm sure 99%, if not all 100% REITs do pay that monthly income.
yeah,
I've yet to find a REIT that pays quarterly, so there might be one out there somewhere. Let us know in the comments if there's a REIT that pays a quarterly dividend. I'd love to know about it.
yeah. I think that real estate backed, especially like Canada's economy, is really tied into its real estate. So I think
Yes.
that um, yeah, there might be like I know there was some disruption during COVID with a lot of like REITs that exclusively own like office buildings and stuff because people were downsizing their offices because a lot of there's been a lot
Yeah.
of shift to people working at home now. So maybe like just when you're doing due diligence, just kind of look at their holdings and see what kind of tenants they have. But a
Yeah.
lot of the REITs, I think, a lot of the big ones that have good dividends, I think, are so diversified that you don't really have to worry as a retail investor.
What about TNT, True North? Any thoughts on that one?
Is True North my
And the
True North?
reason I ask, and the reason I ask is because you mentioned office space, and they do have a lot of office space, but they lease that office space to government. So it's like, well, that's probably a pretty good government's going to pay their rent every month, right?
Yeah, I saw a tweet one time that was saying, yeah, I don't own any TNT, but it's on my watch list apparently. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that I saw a tweet one time that's like that's the best tenant you can have as a government tenant because they pay their bills and they're never going to go under. Like if the federal government is going out of business, we have bigger issues than than your REIT's yield going down. Right? There's probably the streets are on fire and whatever. But
Yeah, exactly. Wow, never thought of it that way, but very true.
yeah,
Very true. Yeah. So,
and I started getting
yeah, I've had
involved
TN.
in Canadian banks. I started going heavy in when someone on Twitter showed me that every one of the big six in Canada just owns 20% of everyone else.
Right.
And I was like, this might be too big to fail. I think our like if the banks start performing poorly, our economy is just we go into turmoil and so I think that's a pretty safe bet as well. Real estate and banking is what Canada's economy is built on.
Yeah, and for those of you who have watched the past few episodes of the Passive Income Podcast, you will know what I'm about to bring up, which is the longevity of the Canadian banks paying dividends. In 2029, the Bank of Montreal will be celebrating. So this is only 7 years away, not very far away. In 2029, guess how many years the Bank of Montreal will have been paying a dividend for?
Older than the country of Canada, right?
200 years. Yeah. So,
Yeah, they've been paying a dividend longer than this country's been a country. Is a pretty good one,
yeah,
isn't it?
since 1829. And for our American viewers who may not be familiar, Canada became a country in 1867. That's a good point. I never even thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so all of the big five banks, I know you mentioned six, but I've been kind of sticking to the first five, which we know. All of them have been paying a dividend. Royal Bank being the youngest, I'll use the term youngest, at since 1870, which is still over 150 years. But the others, uh, Bank of Montreal, the oldest at 1829, Bank of Nova Scotia since 1833, then TD, CIBC, and Royal Bank bringing up whatever years in between there, between 1833 and 1870, but all of them over 150 years, going on to 200 years of paying dividends. So I would agree with you 100%. Like Canadian banks, and I again, if I know some people have watched past episodes of this podcast, and where I've had a lot of American guests on, and they're investing in Canadian banks as well. You can buy them on the New York Stock Exchange as well. They're like, yeah, love them, love Canadian banks,
Yeah.
love the return, love the dividend, everything about them. So they know they're strong. And
Yeah,
sorry, I don't mean to be rambling about Canadian banks, but it's just
it's a
we know how
it's
good of an investment they
yeah,
are.
it's good. It's good investment. Like even in Europe, I remember seeing somebody in the UK posted their like top 20 favorite dividend paying stocks, and it was like four out of five or six banks were Canadian banks were on there, and I'm like, why? Like, why do you know about these stocks? But they're good. They're solid stocks. Like they're just
Yeah.
um,
Well, and that's just it. They're becoming global companies, right? Like TD and Toronto, TD and RBC, and you see them sort of all over the world now in stadium sponsorships and etc. There was another interesting podcast I did earlier with Scoreboard Investor, where we were talking about how you could just build an entire portfolio out of stadium names around North America,
yeah. I mean, if they have enough money to buy the stadium, they probably have enough money to be a reputable company. Eh?
right? No, it was a good conversation. Obviously, you have the Bell Center in Montreal. You have several Rogers sponsored arenas slash stadiums in Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton. You have the MTS Center there in Winnipeg, which I'm guess MTS must be a publicly traded stock as well. I've never really looked into MTS. Any thoughts on
Yeah,
MTS?
they're private, I think now. Or
Oh,
they're
really?
or sorry, they're publicly owned, I think. Hold on. No. Never mind. Sorry. I'm getting my facts mixed up. MTS merged with Bell.
Oh, did they? Okay,
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting my because we have our water here, Manitoba Hydro. They've been talking about going public, like so that people can buy them, but they're still
Right.
like Crown operated. MTS did do that in like the 80s, I think. So they went up and you could buy them, and they are now Bell MTS Place. It used to be called the MTS Center. Now it's Bell MTS Place.
Oh,
Because
I did not know that.
yeah, because they Bell bought the entirety of MTS. I think last year, or the year before.
That's interesting.
But
Wow, that's
yeah, yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Cool.
I'm not too heavily invested in telecom. I don't. I have a few here and there, but I don't. I think like. Do you remember when? Oh, was this countrywide when like just Bell MTS just and like Rogers just the network went out? This is
Yeah,
like a few
well,
months ago, in the summer.
yeah, when Rogers went down, that affected everybody, whether you were on Rogers or not, because
Yeah, the
everything's
ATMs
interconnected.
and yeah. So I that was kind of like a wake up call for me, where I'm like, I might exit my telecom because I feel like they're like I don't try to be an expert in blockchain or cryptocurrency or anything, but I feel like there might be a blockchain approach to telecom in the future where it's like because crypto enthusiasts do say a lot of dumb things on Twitter, but
Yeah.
they've like I've seen a couple of them be like, hey, if we had a decentralized system, then when Rogers goes down, it won't take down our ATMs, right? So I thought that there might be a big
Hmm.
change coming, and I don't know which company is more positioned to take advantage of that change. So I just don't know. I don't like to invest when I don't, kind of understand what I'm investing in.
Going back to that day that Rogers crashed, I did see an absolutely incredible tweet, and it was probably from somebody around your age or maybe slightly older. And the tweet was to the effect of, Top Gun is the number one movie, Metallica is number one on the charts, and there's no internet. This is the closest I'll ever be to 1986.
That's pretty good. Yeah, it was. We my for the winery, we do a lot of like farmers markets in the summer. Like a ton, like 15 a week
Yep.
usually. So we do a lot of like farmers markets, big trade shows, events, stuff like
Wow.
that. So it went out on us, and we have these little square readers to take cards. So those all went down. We were at 4 or 5 different events, plus my bar was open, and all of us, couldn't take payment cards. And then they couldn't even call me to like my employees couldn't call me to figure out what was going on because we didn't have cell service.
Wow.
So that was just not a good. That was a shit show of a day.
How did we ever accomplish anything back in the 1990s?
I wasn't alive, so I don't know.
No, you weren't alive, but like, how did we do it? I don't know.
I don't know either. Horse and buggy in the 90s? I don't
Yeah,
know.
but no, well, yeah.
Smoke
I still like
signals?
riding horses.
Yeah, before I don't remember. Well, I was born post internet, right? So I don't know how
Yeah, you
anyone
grew up
survived.
with the internet.
Every
You
time
grew
I
up with
use
the internet where
yeah, every time I use a GPS, I'm like, how the fuck did people get around before Google Maps? Like,
paper, we had printed out maps and we used road signs.
yeah, now I just got my head down on my phone while I'm driving. Don't even look at the road. Whatever.
Oh, Tesla autopilot. Who needs to look at the road?
There you go. Are you holding any Tesla?
I am not. I do not own any American U.S. shares for the simple fact that I don't want to get caught up in the headache right now of taxes. Well, obviously, right now the exchange rate is not in our favor,
Yeah.
but I also right now I'm just avoiding the headache of how that will affect the taxes. Right? I don't need to get into that right now. I'm just going to focus on building. There's so many great Canadian companies, whether it's telecoms or REITs or energy, and there's other sectors we haven't even talked about. Well, we did talk about food as well, A&W, and other things in. We haven't really got into more consumer staples, but so many sectors in the food industry. Well, sorry, in the Canadian market that I haven't had the need or the want to jump into all those. Sure, I would agree 100%. There's lots of juicy U.S. stocks, whether it's Tesla, Apple, and technology, or Johnson and Johnson and Procter and Gamble and Costco and Pepsi and Coca Cola, and like the list literally just goes on and on and on and on, right? So there's tons of U.S. stocks I probably maybe someday will get into, but right now, I like the saying goes, just trying to build that secure with my Canadian holdings.
Yeah, you can for sure
And
build
again, sorry to ramble, but hopefully that makes sense.
yeah, you can for sure build a totally respectable portfolio on just the TSX. 100%. No question there.
Yeah, guaranteed. Canadian banks as well, going back to what we just mentioned about Canadian banks.
Just buy the banks and retire and you're fine.
Pretty much. I'm sure you've seen Dividend John's tweets and like how much and again, he's been doing this for 20 years, so how much you see some of his tweets, it's like, oh, I just got from Bank of Nova Scotia $2,000 today. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's good for you, bud.
Yeah, I'm getting like a $1.05 dividends. He's getting like $2,000 dividends. Yeah.
But think about where you'll be in 20 years, right? Like you'll be in his position.
Yeah,
Hopefully for
yeah.
you.
I was kind of like in the I did a lot what a lot of other people my age I think did was take our stimmy money at the beginning of COVID and try to buy GameStop and AMC and stuff and try to become a billionaire. And then and was down like
Overnight, which doesn't work.
yeah, and then went down like probably 70% year to date on my portfolio. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna start not just doing what Reddit tells me and start actually looking into doing research and doing significantly better
Yeah.
since I've actually been doing research about stocks.
Funny how that works, right?
It's interesting, yeah. But yeah, now it's like I find it a little bit of addicting. I find it a little bit of a rush to just see how high I can get my portfolio without making being homeless again, and seeing how high I can get my dividends without while still having income other places, and yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, you've definitely come a long way from sleeping in whatever minus weather in Winnipeg to where you are now with obviously your winery success, but also knowing to just not rely on that. Like it's great that you're doing well with the winery, but still trying to build that portfolio. You're young, like I said, in 20 years, you don't even remember things before the internet.
Yeah,
Just
I'm.
cool. Like
Go ahead.
no, so I was just gonna say no. I obviously I've had several younger guests on the podcast in the past, and I love getting their perspective. And it's great that there's so many people in your age category now, and even younger than you, that have the access that you have now to like pick up your phone and get an app and do all of this on your phone. And the same as us old guys, we're doing it with an app on our phones too, but we just didn't have that opportunity back, in 1991 or the early 90s or late 80s, whenever it was, no internet. You didn't have the opportunity to just, have an app on your phone and buy one share or 10 shares every paycheck to start building that portfolio.
Yeah,
And again, sorry, I'm
the accessible.
rambling again. You got to start cutting me off.
Hey, it's your show. I'm not going to cut you off. But yeah, the accessibility is really big. But I think even bigger is the like places like Wealthsimple and Robinhood do the 0% commission trades, which I think was huge for me. Like when
That's
I
huge.
was 18 years old, it's like, oh, maybe I want to buy part of this company that I heard about, but then it's 9.95 to do one trade. I'm like, well, I only have $10 to trade, so then my
Yeah.
return's nothing, right? So I think that the sentiment from people my age, like my friends that even my friends that like aren't really into investing, like they don't know anything about dividend building or anything like that, they'll occasionally throw money onto Wealthsimple because they can do it so easily and commission free. They don't have to worry about all this, whatever.
Right.
So that's and especially if you do it on a TFSA account on Wealthsimple, you don't even have to worry. You don't even have to tell CRA about it.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's
that's
huge.
yeah, huge, huge. Yeah,
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. Wealth Simple, uh, tax-free savings, like it's a no-brainer. And I was there as well, like going back, say, 15 years when finally we did have the internet and we could do things online, but trying to buy shares through your bank, and again, yeah, that same 9.95 per trade, and it's like, well, I can't. It doesn't make sense to buy one share and pay $10. I need to build it up to have enough to like buy 100 shares to pay that $10 for that one trade. But it's really difficult to, let's say it's a just pick a random number, a $6 stock. It's like, okay, well now I have to come up with $600 to buy 100 shares, or if it's a $9 stock, 900, just to kind of make it feel like you're paying like that 9.95 trade commission is worthwhile.
yeah, and especially like I know it's probably smarter to just buy and hold positions forever, but like anyone who ever wants to buy and exit positions with any sort of frequency, paying $10 a trade if you're doing it with a few shares is not realistic, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree 100%. It's the whole point is, and this is again going back to the advantage of having your Wealth Simples and your Robinhoods, where you're at the 0% commission. You can dollar cost average so much easier. You
Yeah.
can buy one, two, three, five, whatever shares every paycheck, once a month, whatever you can figure out to do for yourself, and you're not worried about that $10 trade, that $10 fee every time, right?
Yeah, which I think makes the entire discipline of investing a lot more approachable for people. Like where they don't, like you were saying, I don't have to think about having to save up $1,000 to buy a stock. I have $10 free for like change from my AW. I throw it in the stock market, or I have a little
Yeah,
bit left over in my paycheck. Throw it in the stock market. You don't have to like, because you know how it is. As soon as you like make a separate bank account to start saving for something, and then it's like, oh well, I want to go out for my friend's birthday, so I can just take $100 out of that, and it's like, but once you buy a stock, it's a lot more difficult to like, okay, now I got to go sell it to liquidate it. It's I don't want to do that, so I think it's a lot easier for people to like invest more. Like it just helps the accessibility.
100%.
So I think those companies are really good for people's financial security as a whole. And I think like
Yeah, the platforms they provide are incredible in my opinion.
yeah, and I have a lot of not a lot of great things to say about the government for the most part, but I think for the most part, IROC does a pretty good, like, responsible way of regulating. Like, because in America they have, you can download Robinhood and be 18 and just start doing level 5 options trading on Robinhood with no, they don't check your credibility or anything, and it's just like, okay, yeah, you can buy a bunch of cash secured puts with on AMC and just go to town. But IROC in Canada has a lot more regulation as far as that goes. So I think there's a good balance between letting the uneducated consumer get into investing, which is good for them, and
Yeah.
balancing that with like the more risky stuff. Don't let them do that because that's gambling essentially.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like just go to Las Vegas and
Yeah,
put it all on 13,
yeah.
right? On the roulette wheel.
Yeah, at least like blackjack has like a 1% odds in their favor. Like you have like pretty good, like relatively good odds. Um, but
Right.
buying options, if you don't understand how options work, is like 99.99% chance you're just donating money to Wall Street.
Right.
Some investment banker who's much smarter than you is on the other. Every time you buy an option, somebody else is selling that option for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great point. I think we've kind of touched on a lot of different sectors. We've had a couple deep dives into a few different sectors like REITs, and we kind of got into telecoms a little bit. We sort of touched on technology with Tesla and Apple and whatnot, and we've touched on quite a few of different sectors. Any other sectors that you want to sort of mention or bring up? Anything that you have in your favorites that we haven't talked about yet?
Let me bring on my portfolio again. Yeah, we talked about most of my favorites: banking, yeah, REITs, a lot of my favorite holdings. Trying to think of anything I'm taking a moonshot on recently. I bought some semiconductors recently because I think there's gonna be some
Yeah.
interesting developments next while in that. Um, my best call in the last like 6 months or whatever has been Nutrien. I'm not sure if you're familiar. They're a Canadian potash manufacturer. So
Okay.
potash is basically fertilizer for
Yeah.
farms, and it's actually just outside of my city here in Winnipeg, in Manitoba. It's called Nutrien, ticker NTR, and they are the largest. So the only places that make potash in the world, really, in any meaningful way, are Canada, Russia, and Belarus. And right at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, my friends and I were kind of talking about this, and we're like, what's the big thing that's going to get cut off? Like the oil, obviously, but like the thing that I think the market was underpricing was food that comes from that region.
Yeah.
So when the sanction, so I bought Nutrien before the sanctions went up. Um, but now with the Russian and Belarusian sanctions, Nutrien is the largest producer in the world of potash that can sell to the United States. So I'm up 35% on that since I bought it.
Nice.
So that was my big call where I'm kind of like I don't like to be a doomer, but I'm also like try to be realistic for the market where I'm like,
Yeah. Of course.
a lot of people are going to probably starve to death because of this, but the stock will probably go up. So yeah, you got to do a balance. Like I got to feed myself too, right?
Right. Yeah. No. That sounds like it was a pretty smart play. Like looking at something that we didn't know at the time, but you kind of kind of knew at the time that there's going to be sanctions coming down on Russia and Belarus because obviously Belarus is more or less in bed with
Yeah,
Russia.
ally basically. And
Right.
then if you want another kind of depressing guess one, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I bought some Carrier because they manufacture like air conditioners and stuff. and I think we're gonna have another bad heat wave next year. So maybe start getting into the because like there's a lot of places in Europe that just never needed air conditioners, like a lot of England and stuff that just never had them, that are now putting them into these like I've seen pictures of like these like 600-year-old stone buildings, and they're putting like brand new air conditioners in them because it's never gotten this hot before.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that last summer, like just watching YouTube videos of people from the UK saying like heat wave and like they had never experienced before.
Yeah. So and like I don't think that's getting any better anytime soon. So there might be a lot of
Probably not. That's
yeah, a lot of air conditioners on say going up as well. So
yeah, that's climate change for you. We don't know 100% where it's going, but we have a pretty good idea where it's going, right?
yeah, and then someone today was actually saying that Ford was on sale. Like they had a little drop, so they were buying a Ford position, and I was kind of saying I don't know because like one of my favorite Twitter accounts is Unusual Whales. I don't know if you're familiar, but they basically watch the stock market, and then whenever like there's like what like it sounds like unusual whale trades, like big trades that are kind of unusual, they note
Right.
them. So they were talking today about, or they just tweeted today that I'm trying to find the tweet here, um, just so I don't misquote it. But they were saying there's a yeah. So Representative Bob Gibbs in the United States has disclosed that he just sold a massive amount of Ford, and then this guy just got like he's on the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and they had a meeting, and then immediately he exits his Ford position entirely. So I'm kind of looking at that, and I'm like, okay, so I know that the United States wants to
Sounds
go.
sketchy.
Yeah, I want to. I know that they want to go no more gas cars by 2035 or whatever it is. They're gonna if
Hmm.
they want to go all electric. If the federal government has hundreds of thousands of vehicles and fleets, they're gonna need a partner to go electric, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say this guy on a committee deciding that would pick the company that he gets to partner with. Who's really positioned to do that? Probably Ford or GM. I don't think Tesla's really in a position to partner with the federal government. So and then this guy goes to a closed door meeting, comes out and sells all his Ford. That kind of is like maybe buy some GM. I don't know, but that's just stuff like that where it's like
Doesn't that scream insider trading to you?
yeah. Well, look at what Nancy Pelosi does. Like I don't know, man. They're just allowed. They're allowed to buy and sell stocks of committees that they sit on. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think on that note, because I don't want to open up that can of worms. I think on that note, well, thank you so much for your time coming on the Passive Income Podcast. And if you're still watching or listening, please be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. And be sure to follow at Vote Willows on Twitter. And give you one last shout out, anything you want to shout out other than your Twitter handle. But I believe you have a podcast as well, and anything else, a YouTube channel or blog or what anything, go for it.
Okay, yeah. So if you want to follow my stock trades on Twitter, that's at Drunk Dividends on Twitter. But at my main account, my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube is all Vote Willows, VOTEWILOWS. I have a podcast as well called Alcohol Beyond This Point, where we debate business topics, both sober and drunk, to see if we come to the same conclusions. Hope to see Dave on that podcast coming up soon. So you can follow that Alcohol Beyond This Point. If you just Google it, you'll find it. And then if you want to buy some wine, if you're in the Canada country and you want to buy some wine, Shrugging Doctor Beverage Company is the name of my winery. That's shrugdoc.com, SHRUGDOC.com. We ship everywhere in Canada, $25 flat rate shipping, coast to coast, and free over 12 bottles. So we have 20 products available right now. We usually have about 35 through the year. We do a lot of small batch seasonal stuff. We have a wine club as well. So check us out, shrugdoc.com, SHRUGDOC.com. And then that's shrugdoc on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok as well.
Cool. So it sounds like it would be pretty easy to get to the to the free shipping part, like 12 bottles later, and you get the free shipping. So look into that for sure. We'll definitely put the links in the description below. And yeah, again, thank you so much for your time. I should have asked, Vote Willows, are you running for mayor of Winnipeg?
Anything. Vote
I'm
vote
running for
vote
anything.
for anything. Yeah, I made that Twitter handle, or I came up with the Vote Willows thing when I was 12. So I don't know if I just had
Okay.
always had political aspirations or what, but it's just Vote Willows. Um, Here's a fun fact about me before we go. I actually have 5 people that have Vote Willows tattooed on them.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, that makes you popular.
I'm a I'm a brand, baby.
Okay, and with that said, yes, definitely someday you will see me on oh my goodness. On the what was it called?
Alcohol beyond this
Beyond
point.
Alcohol?
So it's like
Alcohol Beyond This Point
you
podcast.
know, you see a
One
sign
day
that's
I
like
will
no
be
alcohol
there.
beyond this point. It's like that, but it is alcohol beyond this point.
Right, right. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for being on the Passive Income Podcast. I appreciate it so much. And we'll talk again real soon.
Sounds good, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you.